So welcome to this presentation. I'm Gemma Holtham and I'm representing the Long Game. And this presentation is going to focus on the autism employment gap. And more specifically, what do autistic higher education students and autistic graduates think about this issue? So who are the Long Game? The Long Game are a peer-led employability charity and they focus on providing career support by and for autistic HE students and graduates. So the Long Game's just a few months old and we launched in October 2021. When we launched, we were conscious that although we're an autistic-led organisation, our views don't necessarily represent the wants and needs of the wider community. So with this in mind, our first few months focused on speaking to over 120 autistic HE students and graduates about their workplace experiences and what did they want from the charity. And if you look on screen now, this is a photo from one of our first focus groups. This is a group of students that we spoke to at Sheffield Hallam University. So before I talk to you about the Long Game's activities and what our HE students and graduates have discussed with us and how this might affect your practice, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a very quick introduction into the current landscape for HE students. So we're going to start at the bottom left and go round clockwise. Since 2008, the number of students who declare they're autistic at the start of their HE course has risen by over 16,000%. So despite this significant increase, what we found was actually it's only 1 in 5 autistic students who know that they're autistic during their undergraduate studies. So most autistic students at university don't know that they're autistic yet. Despite this, the University of Newcastle analysed some state school data last year, and what they found was nowadays in school, it's actually 1 in 50 pupils that already have an autism diagnosis. So numbers have changed quite a lot recently, because it was only a few years ago we was being told that actually it's only 1% of the population that is autistic, and now those numbers have doubled. So if we look at state school data and how 2% of pupils now know they're autistic, this number doesn't actually translate into HE. So if we look at the number of students who are declaring they're autistic, it's only 0.26% of all HE students. So this actually suggests out of those who know that they're autistic when they're starting university, about 3 in 4 of them are deciding to keep this information to themselves. So it isn't surprising that there's a lot of autistic students who don't want to tell their HE provider that they are autistic when you start looking at actually how HE providers and the companies that support autistic students behave. So a lot of institutions and a lot of companies often talk about the social model of disability. So they talk about how it's man-made barriers that cause the challenges that autistic higher education students and graduates face. There's also a lot of talk about the neurodiversity movement and how autistic individuals are fighting to have their neurotype recognised as a natural difference rather than a disability. Despite this, a lot of university web pages and a lot of the training by companies actually reinforce the false and harmful stereotypes that exist, and this actually fuels the stigma and prejudice that autistic individuals face. So this was just a very quick search in May 2020, and this is the information that's on university web pages today. So a lot of institutions refer to their autistic students, even though they know that they are fighting to be seen as different rather than disabled. They refer to their neurotype as a lifelong developmental disorder. They explain that autistic individuals have difficulty in interpreting ambiguous and open assignment briefs, that autistic individuals are rigid in their thinking, they have difficulty picking up unwritten social rules, especially when interacting with their tutors and fellow students, that they're 10 times more likely to drop out of university, that they lack understanding of why something needs to be done, and that they'd rather be seen as mysterious rather than autistic. So if you're not autistic, if you just put yourself in the shoes of an autistic individual for a minute, imagine if this is the kind of information that was being portrayed about you when you just wanted to go to university and you wanted to study a course. So that's actually quite a lot of baggage that is being put on autistic individuals, especially when at the minute there is the neurodiversity movement and autistic individuals are fighting to be seen as just a little bit different rather than people who do have a condition and who are disabled. So to give you some context, the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistics Manual of Mental Disorder, that's what's currently used to diagnose autism as a condition. And the DSM promotes the autistic way of being as a deficit and as an impairment. So this is actually the same manual that right up into the 1970s was used to diagnose homosexuality as a mental illness. And psychiatrists used to use this manual to medically diagnose being attracted to the same sex as a sociopathetic personality disturbance. So homosexuality was actually removed from the DSM after society started to accept this way of being as a natural difference rather than an illness. And this is what it's like for autistic individuals today. So if you think about the level of mental health issues that used to exist in the LGBTQ plus community, and now it actually wasn't until 2003 that it became illegal to discriminate against the LGBTQ plus community within the workplace. This is where we are today with autistic individuals. So there's currently no employment law that makes it illegal to discriminate against an individual because of their neurotype. This means that if an autistic individual isn't willing to be seen as disabled, they actually have no protection under equality law. And if their colleagues do want to discriminate against them because their sensory needs or their communication needs are in the minority, they can. So I'll just let that sink in for a minute. So now you're having a bit more of an understanding of what it's like to be autistic today and why autistic individuals are fighting to be seen as equals in relation to their peers. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit more about what it's like in HE. So professionally, I found that a lot of people who are happy to walk around with wearing a rainbow lanyard and they're happy to show that they're an ally to the LGBTQ plus community don't actually give the same respect to their autistic colleagues and the autistic students that they support. So for example, I sat in a training session and the trainer was actually wearing one of these lanyards. They was aware of the neurodiversity movement, but instead of supporting this, they actually told all of my colleagues that autistic individuals can't work in a team, autistic individuals can't make friends, and they referred to autistic individuals as little professors. So there was promoting the narrative that autistic individuals are only good at focusing in one subject. They're not able to look at the wider picture. So my experience is autistic people are just people. We've all got different strengths, we've all got different weaknesses, different skill sets, different levels of ambition. I know autistic individuals who are directors of large departments. I know autistic individuals who run their own legal companies and manage a number of staff. I know autistic lawyers, autistic nurses, autistic teachers, but this isn't talked about. Autistic individuals are often reduced to a very small list of characteristics, and it's all based on false and harmful stereotypes. So, as we've seen so far, there's currently a trend for those working in HE to portray autistic individuals as subordinates. So this is even when the data shows that actually a lot of autistic individuals don't need to access any additional support whilst they're at university because of their neurotype. So the narratives that the media portray are also as equally as negative. If we look at the BBC in 2021, they published a story and it praised two celebrities for being open about being autistic. So by praising people for being open, it was suggesting that actually you should kind of be ashamed of who you are if you are autistic, and it's not something people normally talk about. If we look on the right, we can see that even though it's 50 years since the DSM stopped classing homosexuality as a mental disorder, the issues that exist around the stigma and prejudice that the gay community have faced still live on. So in May 2022, in the UK, we had the first openly gay footballer for 20 years. And just last year, the military were agreeing to give British soldiers compensation and their medals back after they'd been discharged from the army just simply on grounds that they were a homosexual. So this was actually right up until, well, into the early 2000s, that if you was gay and you was in the army, you could be sacked for that. So in 2021, the military are apologising for this, but at the same time, it doesn't seem to be that lessons have been learned, because if we look on the right, we can see that there's recently been an article where they're discussing 37 soldiers have recently been kicked out of the army simply because they was diagnosed as autistic. So they was offered a place in the army before their diagnosis. There wasn't any issues with their performance or with their conduct, but simply because they'd had this label put on their medical record, that was it, that career was over, and they now have to find something else to do. So if you think about all this, it's no surprise that this year there was an article in The Guardian that was explaining that autistic therapists, autistic psychologists, and autistic nurses often feel that they have to keep this part of their identity a secret because they're worried about the misconceptions that exist in relation to what it means to be autistic and the impact that that could have on their careers. So when the Long Game spoke to autistic HE students and graduates about their careers, it's no surprise that 9 out of 10 stated they faced workplace discrimination, and this includes on university placements. What is quite shocking is when you find out that actually, as a charity, when we started this research, we didn't ask any direct questions relating to workplace discrimination. But because this behaviour has a life-changing and long-lasting effect on people, this is actually what our community wanted to talk about. So autistic HE students and graduates, they don't believe that the autism employment gap is ever going to be successfully addressed unless society takes meaningful action to address the stigma and prejudice that this community faces. So I'm currently unaware of any initiatives that are taking place to support higher education students to navigate having a stigmatised identity and what this means within the workplace. I also don't know of any initiatives that autism specialists, such as autism officers or autism mentors, are doing to support the neurodiversity movement or to depathologise autism and break down the stigma and prejudice that does exist. So if anything is happening, please do let me know, because I'd absolutely love to be able to learn from the practice of other people. So what could you do? So what practical tips are there for helping you to affect change for the autistic community? So number one, remember you're a thought leader. So the way that you speak about autistic individuals and the narrative that you promote, it does have a significant impact on the way that autistic individuals are viewed. So if you currently talk about autistic individuals in a negative way, or you currently portray them as subordinates compared to their peers, you might want to think about that and maybe think about rephrasing things. So, number 1, remember that you're a thought leader. So the way that you speak about autistic individuals when you are at work and the narrative that you promote, it has the potential to have a significant impact upon the way that autistic individuals are viewed. So number 2, advocate rather than oppress. So let's go back to the 1970s for a minute. And for example, now instead of being potentially an autism officer, you're now a homosexuality officer. What camp do you want to be in? Are you going to be in the camp that reinforces the narrative that being gay is a mental disorder? Or would you be supporting their fights for equal rights? In 2022, who do you want to be? Are you going to be in the camp that fuels the stigma autistic individuals face? Or do you want to be in the camp that supports this community in their fight for their behaviour just to be seen as a natural difference rather than a deficit or a disability? And number 3, consider the language that you use. So everything you write on a web page, such as an online post, or anything you say to a student, it all has the potential to impact an autistic person and either increase the baggage that they carry or to influence whether they're seen as an equal or a subordinate. So next, autistic individuals are currently in the minority, but being a minority does actually mean you are part of the majority. So autistic individuals actually have a lot of commonalities with their peers, but instead of this being discussed and helping these individuals to develop a sense of community, what normally happens is autistic behaviour is often framed in a way that places these individuals as outsiders. So, for example, people often discuss how autistic individuals mask, and this often is talked about as if it's a phenomenon that's specific to the autistic community, and that it's something that's unhealthy and that it's something that's wrong. So, although it's used to place autistic individuals as outsiders, I'm yet to hear anybody that discusses this topic in a way that normalises the autistic experience. But actually, masking is a human trait and it's something that most of their peers will be doing. So, for example, here we can see there was an article in the BBC a few days ago where an individual was talking about, because of their race, she deliberately changes the way that she looks and the way that she talks to be able to fit in at work. On the right-hand side, we can see that recently a law has been passed in France and it's now illegal to discriminate against somebody because they've got a regional accent. And if you actually look at this kind of stuff, current data suggests that actually it's 1 in 4 people in the UK who changes their accent at work because they're worried that actually the way that they speak would negatively affect their career. So when you are talking about autistic individuals or you are talking to autistic students, remember that actually autistic individuals have a lot more in common with their peers than they do that places them apart. And finally, just make sure that you remember the power that you have. So you can change the way that society views autistic people. So thank you for watching this presentation. If anybody would like to contact me about this, or if you'd like to find out more about the long game and the work that we have planned to support autistic higher education students and to support autistic graduates to tackle the workplace discrimination that they face, my email is gemmaholtham@empoweringAutistics.org. And if you'd like to have a look at our website, it's www.empoweringautistics.org.